Cloud webinar series. Today we have Richard Broida, who is a practice director of our connected systems here at Bennett Adelson. He's got over 20 years of solution architecture experience and is concentrating his abilities in the Azure space now. Today he's going to speak about Azure DevOps, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Richard.
And hello, this is Richard, and I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty, I think, maybe. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Richard, we can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay, good. All righty, then I'll start right in. My name is Richard Broida, and thank you all for joining us. I'm the practice director for Azure Application Development and Connected Systems at Bennett Adelson Consulting here in lovely Cleveland, Ohio. I'm going to talk to you about Azure DevOps. This is part of a series that we're doing on application development and management in Azure environment in particular, although most of what we're going to talk about can be applied to other kinds of clouds or hybrids or on-premise solutions. And we're going to focus today on continuous feedback in cloud applications. So this is who we are at Bennett Adelson. Our practices, we have several practices involving application development, user experience, using cloud resources, doing advanced infrastructure, business intelligence, and office productivity. This is my email address. You can also find me just by searching on LinkedIn. I used to put my Twitter account on here, but I haven't been on Twitter in over a year, so I don't even list it anymore. But that's who I am. And here's our agenda. This is going to be mostly demos today, me talking and demonstrating things. I'm going to have a few slides, and you'll be welcome to the slide deck afterward if you want us to send it, but it'll be fairly sparse. I'm going to be looking at what I'm showing you on my screen most of the time, so if you have, I'd ask you first of all to keep your mute buttons pushed so that we don't get a lot of background on the presentation. If you want to make a comment or ask a question, you can write it in the comment window to the side of your Skype viewer if you have the Skype desktop application. I will not be looking at those, but either Brian or Nilesh from Bennett Adelson will, and we'll leave some time at the end to answer or respond to any questions or comments. So with that, let's get started. So I want to begin by, actually in kind of an unusual way, by starting not with the first slide, but rather with a demo. And this is going to be a demonstration of how to set up an Azure DevOps project, which, if you've never seen one of these before, you may be a little unclear about what we're doing, but hopefully this will make sense. What I'm going to do is show you how to set up a complete Azure solution that we can then monitor in the course of the demo. Because the demo gods may not be smiling today, and because Azure itself, being a cloud thing, is not always as quick as you would like, although it's going to be pretty quick, I'm going to start this demo first and let it run for a little bit. And while it's running, I'll go back to the slides and cover what this is all about. If you've seen Azure DevOps projects before, this should look familiar. If not, I'll explain briefly what I'm doing as I do it, and then I'll go back to the slides and explain a little more. But what we're basically going to do here is create, in one fell swoop, we're going to create an Azure application, and we're going to create a DevOps project in the online tool that is now called Azure DevOps, which is going to allow us to create and manage this project in an agile manner, all at once. So when I first start to create one, it's going to ask me what kind of a application I want to create. I'm going to stick with .NET here. And I'm going to make this an ASP.NET Core application, and I'm going to throw in an Azure SQL database to go with it. And then I'm going to click Next. I could either deploy this as an Azure hosted virtual machine environment or as a Windows web app. I'm going to choose Windows web app because it's faster and also has a very nice integration with the monitoring tools that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to choose that. Now it's going to ask me to configure this. So I'm going to give it a name, Wonder Power. It's going to ask me for an Azure DevOps organization. Azure DevOps is derived from the old Microsoft Team Foundation server. So this term DevOps organization is what we used to call a project collection, if you're familiar with that terminology. But I'm setting it up in an Azure DevOps organization that I already have, which is named after me, called brightest. And this project that we have up here at the top, that's talking about the project name in Azure DevOps. So everything that we're going to collect within Azure DevOps is going under that name. This here is going to be the name of the web app that I'm going to be hosting in Azure. Down here, this shows you the rest of the URL that my website's going to start out having. This is the Azure region where it's going to be located. This is the pricing tier, S1, which is a basic but full-featured tier for a demo. And just a moment, please, while I forgot to mute my phone. Let's say, hang on while I turn my phone off. Okay. Now, I have one extra setting I need to make over here. When I chose the name, I used mixed case, and it's going to create an Azure SQL database. And you're not allowed to have mixed case names in an Azure SQL database, so I have to edit that over here. For good measure, I'm going to change the name of the administrator's password to one that I can remember. And everything else here I'm going to leave the same. And let's see, I clicked OK. Demo God should be carrying out my wishes. What's going on here? So, already I'm having connection problems. That's not good. Again. There we go. And I'm just going to click Done. All right, and it's going to start creating all those things I was just describing. I'm going to leave it here to simmer and go back to the slides and talk about what I'm doing here. The goal of this presentation is to talk about how do we create a seamless chain of agile development for a project. And if you look at this, this figure 8 pattern, which you may have seen before, on the left-hand side of it, the loop on the left-hand side, we have the sort of circular diagram of a traditional traditional agile methodology, which says plan, code, build, test, and then repeat. And then the orange part on the right says release, deploy, operate, and monitor. A lot of organizations, including many of the ones that we deal with at Bennett Adelson, are treating these two sides of the coin separately in the way they're organized and the way they operate. So you have one group of people, or maybe multiple groups of people, but they're concentrated on the blue part on the left. They plan, code, build, and test software, but they don't release it, deploy it, or operate it, or monitor it. They instead, when a version of the software is ready to go into a test environment or a staging environment or a production environment, they hand it off to an operations team. The term DevOps traditionally meant the folks in an IT organization that handle the steps of releasing, deploying, operating, and monitoring. The two teams, or the two types of roles on a team typically don't interact. They do more and more, but there's still a lot of cases where people on one side, the left side don't interact very closely with people on the right side. In order to gain more productivity, though, and in order to reach the goals of Agile development, we'd like to be able to integrate the two things. The original goal of Agile development is to deliver working software that provides business value. And in order to be working, you've got to have an environment to run it in, and you've got to be able to tell that it is working and not just that it's delivering value. So that's what the goal of the Azure DevOps tools are. As I said, Azure DevOps is a new name that Microsoft came up with earlier this year for a cloud-based Agile development / DevOps suite of products. They're all hosted in Azure. It's all derived from the on-premise Azure Team Foundation product. And the two are kept fairly closely in sync. These are the main parts of it. We're going to be concentrating on the Azure Pipelines part, which is the rocket ship right in the middle. And we're also going to look briefly at the Azure Repository, which is the source control system that's built into it. There's also tools in there for running automated tests in the cloud, and the Azure Boards is for doing Kanban boards or sprint planning and things like that. So I'm going to go back and show you where we are in terms of this development project I've started. It's saying here that the deployment is complete. Now, what that really means is that my Azure DevOps part of this is done. I'm going to click where it says go to resource, and you'll see that when this refreshes, I'm going to get two parts. My internet connection seems to be slow, so this is maybe it's just still working at it. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to cheat, and rather than wait for that, I'm going to take you over to another one that I've already set up. This is my backup. Hopefully this will display. Here we go. So this is one that I built yesterday that I have set up and operating already. And these are the parts that we're going to have in the new one I just created once it finishes provisioning it. The part on the left here are the parts that have to do with the Azure DevOps side of things. So if and that's also where these menu links along the top are going. So if I just click this, it says Project Homepage. Now, I was in the Azure portal here. Now I'm in the Azure DevOps portal, and I'm within this particular project I call WonderSite. This is its home page. And over here I have the Azure boards, which don't really have much in them. This is the code repository, and these are the pipelines. Pipelines are of two types. We have build pipelines and release pipelines. These are what are going to actually deploy my software into the Azure application I'm creating. Let's see if this is coming along any better over here. It is not, so I will go over here instead. Let's take a look at what the source code, well, first of all, over on the right, I have links to the parts of the Azure application that I've created. And this is like the one I'm just starting. It has an Azure website, and it has an Azure SQL database. And this is the website's URL. So this is the code that the Azure DevOps project generated for me. I actually haven't altered this code at all. This is what the whole thing looks like. And what we see here is, if you look here, it says total visits. This, what it uses the SQL Server database for is to count how many times the web application is visited on each page. And there are 3 pages. This is the home page. There's an about page. It will come up, and there's a contact page. And again, these are all just bare bones, the way that the project generated them. If we look at the source code for this, it's, as I said, it's over in this repository. And click to here. It's in Git. This is Git hosted in Azure DevOps. You can also use the the Team Foundation source control system. The DevOps project doesn't create it that way, but you can use that if you prefer to use the traditional Team Foundation style source control. If you're going to use Git, you have a Git repository, a central cloud-based Git repository right here, and you can download the code from that project into Visual Studio. So done here, and you can see here this is the structure of the project. Now, one thing I want to show you is that when the DevOps project created all this code, it has all of the application code in here. This is the .NET Core, the ASP.NET Core project itself. There's another test. There are two testing projects. One contains unit tests using Visual Studio Test, and the other one contains functional tests. These are using the Chrome driver here to automate the actual use of a simulated browser to test the application. So it creates all that under application. Down here we have an ARM template. ARM templates are ways of defining what properties an Azure resource should have using a declarative schema that's set up in JSON. So if you go down here to this resource section, this says we're going to have an Azure website. It's going to have these properties. We're going to have App Insights instrumentation. We're going to have an Azure SQL. We're going to have a hosting plan here, which is where Azure Web Applications are basically the unit of billing for that. And here's more about Application Insights, and then here's the Azure SQL Server being defined as well. I can edit all of this in source control, check that code in, and the next time I do an automated build or deployment in Azure DevOps, whatever changes I make in this edited file will affect what gets deployed. And I'm hoping that my not progressing well at all. Try refreshing this. Okay, well now we're doing better. Okay, so here's my new stuff. So if you look over here on the left again, you can see that it created source control code for this new project. It went ahead and ran the build pipeline. So, and as part of the build pipeline, it included a step to run the unit tests that were in that unit test project, and they passed. Now it's in the process of releasing and deploying this project into Azure. And you can see over on the right that it's partly done. It's created the app service here, and it's created the SQL database over here. This little pinwheel shows us that it's still in progress. Well, it says in progress right here. This is usually the part that takes the longest to run. So it says it's up to 5 of 7 tasks here. This is a very nice schematic view. Now these stages that it talks about, by default, it creates an environment called dev, which makes sense. That's for development. I can create more Azure environments and define more places that I'd like to be able to deploy this application after I get the first one up and running. So I can have a QA that we can go to next after that, and then a staging, and then a production one after that. If I click here, I'll get details about what's actually going on. And we can see that it's actually finished deploying the application into Azure, and it's finished setting up the database in Azure SQL. It's now running that integration test that I mentioned, which using the Chrome driver, which takes a little bit longer to set up. But we're almost done here. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and set up this new project in Visual Studio. This is Visual Studio 2019, by the way, and it's very handy to make a local clone of a project from either Azure, from a repository, either in Azure DevOps or in GitHub. I'm going to choose Azure DevOps. I've previously logged Visual Studio into Azure, so it recognizes my subscription here. I'm going to go into this project, and here's R. Broida. I said I wanted to create this. And here's WonderPower. So I'm going to connect to that. Just a minute, my phone is not turned off. Now it is. Okay, and I'm going to clone this to my local drive. I don't want it there. I want it C drive here. Okay, so now let's put all the source code that we saw previously from the other project. Now this new project is in my folder on my local drive. I'm going to switch from the folder view to the traditional .NET solution view, and we can see all the source code in here. Now, once I've done all this, the only other thing I need to do if I want to start using this with Azure DevOps is I'm going to go to my project menu up here, and you can see I've got a choice here to add application insights telemetry. I'm going to select that and click get started. Again, it's looking up my Azure subscription. I've already logged into Visual Studio, so it knows where to look. And let's see, I don't want it to create a new Application Insights resource. I want it instead to connect to the one that Azure DevOps project just created for me. So I'm going to select that and say register. It is going to check my credentials, I think. Yep. And it says, okay, we're good. All right, while I'm at it, I'm going to give myself something to monitor. I'm going to go into these pages. This is the code behind the contacts page. I have a little code that I'd want to investigate later. I'm going to throw a little simulated problem. Every time this page loads, we're going to check the date time in milliseconds, and if it's divisible by 7, we're going to make it sleep for 3 seconds, which would be a performance problem. I'm going to go into the About page, and I'm going to make that throw an exception. Every 13th, if the date time millisecond is divisible by 13, we'll throw an exception. Okay, and with that, I'm going to commit these changes into my local Git repository. Be able to hear my keyboard clicking. I like a very clicky keyboard. And now that we've checked in the changes, I'm going to push them up to the Azure repository here. Just a moment. Okay, and that's probably about all I'm going to do in Visual Studio right now. That is going to trigger a new build and release. Okay, you can see the code's checked in. Now the build link right here. It has a little pinwheel on it telling us that a new build has started. The build is configured to trigger every time I check code into the master branch in the Git repository. And it's running down here. I can click on it again and see details about what it's actually doing. If you're familiar with how either TFS or Azure DevOps or Visual Studio Team Service works, these are the normal steps you would follow when you're building a .NET application. So I'll just leave that to run for the time being. Let's go back. While that's going on, we don't have to stop the website in order for this to happen. Here's the initial iteration of this thing up and running. And you can see again that every time I click on a page and come back to the home page, it increments this total visits by 2 clicks. Okay, once I get this running, then I'm going to want to test it. And I have a little test engine here running in PowerShell. I've actually been running this against the Wonder site application that I had built previously, and it's been running for a while. I ran it overnight, and I just ran it for an hour or so just now. I'm going to change the all I'm going to need to do to make this test the new site I just created is change the name of the in the URL right here, and that to Wonder Power. Save it. What this will do is it'll go into an endless loop and it'll generate a random number. If that number is divisible by 3, it'll visit just the home page. If it's divisible by 7, it'll visit the home page, the about page, and the contact page in that order. And if it's divisible by 11, it'll go in the opposite order. And if it's divisible by 5, it'll call up a non-existent path on the website, which will throw a 404 error. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, to do that, I have one line of PowerShell code up here to make sure that it will negotiate the security token that it's going to be receiving from the website. But I'm going to go ahead and run this, if this is ready to run, and it is. And you can see it's just spitting out on the window below the HTML that's coming back, well, the HTTP, including the HTML, that's coming back from the website. And you can see the red message is coming back whenever there's an error generated. So I'm just going to leave this thing running to simulate actual traffic on the site. Let's go back into dashboard here. We see it's still building. Okay, I'll let that deploy. Now, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to again go back to my cheat sheet and go over to the site that I already have set up. And let's look at what the application insights is all about. So if we go, actually what I'm going to do is show you the resource group first. So an Azure resource group is the collection or the container that has all of the Azure resources that our DevOps project created. So this is the website or web application. This is the web applications hosting plan. This is the Azure SQL database server and the actual Azure SQL database. And this is the application insights resource. And they're all, and then this is a dashboard. We'll get to talk about that in a minute. So look at the application insights itself. This is stuff I can create, and when I get done with the next build of my newly created site, I'll show you how I set this up. But this is the default view into what I can see when I have the web application connected to the application insights. And the most important thing that I'm interested in seeing here are the first 3 things on the top. I'm getting a chart, a ribbon that's showing me how many failed requests I've been getting. You can see a kind of a sawtooth pattern because it's sort of a random way that I'm generating them. The server response time, again, kind of a sawtooth pattern because of the sort of random way that I'm generating them. And then the number of requests coming through. This is also kind of a sawtooth because of those delays in the response time that's happening over here. And then this last thing is availability. This is generated for me by the Application Insights infrastructure. What happens is that at a regular interval, like I think it's once a minute, Azure will send a ping signal to my website and see if it responds. And it will do that whether anybody's actually using the site or not. And that way, if it does fail for whatever reason, to respond to this test, that'll generate a blip on here. And as we're showing you, I can configure this I can configure any of these things to send alerts out or to trigger an investigation. The nice thing about this, looking at this from a development standpoint, let's go back to the slides, is that anybody can look at this, okay? Any resource at all that I won't say any resource at all, almost any resource that you set up in Azure can be monitored using either Application Insights itself or similar sets of tools that Microsoft has had in place for a while in Azure, and which Microsoft is constantly expanding to other services in Azure. Which means that you can monitor individual applications, or you can monitor individual resources. You can monitor things at the Azure subscription level, at the Azure tenant level, which is if you have an Azure Active Directory set up. You can also feed custom sources into it from outside. So if you have monitoring tools you're using that are not Microsoft products or that don't run in a Microsoft environment, whether they're open source or some third-party ones, they can be configured to send data in as well. And then the key part is the services in the middle. So, this is called the Azure Monitor, which is Microsoft's overall term for all the different monitoring services that are available now in Azure. It's they like to call it a monitoring service rather than a monitoring database, because it's something you can query in real time, and it stores data persistently, but it's a streaming source of data, so it can be updated routinely as as data comes in. And then once data goes into the Azure Monitor repositories here, it can be then used in all these different ways it's showing on the right. Application Insights is one of the types of clients that we can use to look at and use and analyze this data. You can also feed it into visualization tools such as Power BI and the dashboard that I'm going to demonstrate for you in a little bit. And then there are more detailed analytical tools that are available. Log Analytics is a query language that you can use. It's similar to SQL to query over streaming data as it's streaming. And then you can also set up alerts. And you can also feed this data from the monitoring into other Azure services. That's what's showing here on the bottom. So you can feed it into logic apps, event hubs, or just send it to web APIs. So that if you have your own custom systems, or you want to create custom systems that respond to monitoring data, you can just create them and hook them up down below. It's an open API. This is the traditional view of what Application Insights looks like. This diagram actually comes off of the current Application Insights page, but it's already just a little bit out of date because it's suggesting that the way you get Application Insights data is by planting it yourself in your own application. So it's showing in the upper right corner if you want to put Application Insights metrics into the code that you write. in your web pages, or if you're writing JavaScript, you're writing all your application in JavaScript or in a mobile app, you can put it in JavaScript pages or in mobile application pages. You can also put it on the server side in your web servers. So if you have web APIs, you can embed it in there. But actually now, as we're really showing on this slide, it can come directly from the Azure resource itself. And just now, I did not put any code into my Visual Studio project in order to trigger any Azure Insights, Application Insights monitoring. It just happens once it gets properly deployed. Let's go take another look at that. Oh, I'm here yet. Get on there. I'm going to pin this to the demo dashboard that I had set up. And it looks like the deployment is done. Wonderful. So if I go in the Application Insights here, I'm not seeing a whole lot of data yet, even though it's been, my PowerShell script has been throwing requests at it. I need to do one more step, and that is to go back into the web application. There are several ways I can get into it. I'll just do it by clicking there. Right here is on the web applications home page is a link to the Application Insights resources, and it says it wants me to turn Application Insights on. This is not on by default. One reason it's not on by default is that although Application Insights is not very expensive as these things go, it's not totally free either. The rule is that you get 5 gigabytes worth of data per month for free. And then it's something like $1.30 a gig, I think, per month, if I'm remembering that right. So not that expensive, and certainly not that expensive for doing development work or just giving demos. So I'm going to enable this to collect Application Insights data directly from the Azure app. I'm going to, let's see, collection level. I'm going to choose the recommended collection level. Profiler, yes. Snapshot debugger, yes. Show local variables in your application when an exception is thrown. I'm going to turn that on to yes, although this is off by default, and so is the next one. SQL commands tracing turned off by default. Before you turn those on, you want to think a little bit about security, because you might get customer data or user data captured, especially if you're turning this on a live production website or any kind of application that's running in production and handling clients' data or users' data, because there's nothing in Application Insights per se that knows how to suppress or conceal confidential information or personally identifying information. So you definitely want to think about that and maybe talk to whoever's in charge of security in your organization before you just turn these on. But for our purposes, this is all a demo. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it all on. So I'm going to say yes. I want to turn all that on. And it's about 30 seconds or so to get this fired up. Today, the internet's slow, you know, or at least Azure is slow, so it's a little longer than 30 seconds. But there we go. So now, I'll go in here. All right, already I'm seeing more. I'm seeing the failed requests list here is starting to show some life, and so are the server request lists, and the response times are all beginning to fluctuate. Okay, these are sampling at at 15-minute intervals, it looks like, or they're graphing at 15-minute intervals. They take a little time to refresh. They're not instantaneous. One of the enhancements that Microsoft has made to application insights in the last, really just, I think in the last year or so, is the ability to create a live metrics stream. And a live metric stream is pretty much that. Okay, these requests, this is now showing us requests that are coming in from my PowerShell script in pretty close to real time. Notice too over here that it's gone ahead and it's showing me the bad requests that are coming in, again, in real time or near real time. Now, this can be handy for a lot of things. If I am in fact testing, then I'm running a suite of integrated tests, or I have a bunch of human users who are hammering on the application. I can be watching what's going on as it goes on. You'll notice too that in addition to there's a little more detail here than we had before. It's showing me CPU consumption, and this one down here is showing me just the failures that are resulting from exceptions within the application. Okay, so this is the live feed, the live stream. Another nice thing that comes with this, let's see how well this is going to work. This sometimes doesn't. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is the application map. This is showing me a nice graphical view of the service calls that are being made from my central app, which is the green circle, to the back-end service, the SQL database, showing me how many calls have been made and what the average time of those calls is. I can look at details about either one. Let's look at the SQL Server. This takes me over to the Azure SQL Database Monitor, which is its own separate thing. This is not all coming from Application Insights on SQL Server. This is built-in monitoring that you get with the Azure SQL Database. Another thing we can see is if we just want to focus on failures here, yeah, we don't have very many yet, but this is already showing us that we're getting 404s and 500s. Here are some samples that we can drill into. I can filter this, but if I just go look, I'm not really interested in the 404s. But I would like to look at one of these. Okay, so because I have maximum debug information turned on, remember when I enabled Application Insights, I went ahead and chose everything. And so it's giving me the full stack trace over here. Let's see if I can drill into this further. Also on this okay, anyway, I'm able to go in and actually view the whole snapshot dump of this if I have it enabled. That may not be quite ready to turn on yet because I just turned it on. Likewise, I can investigate performance problems. So there's some samples of those. And again, I can select any of these and look into what happened and why. All right, I want to show you two more things quick, and then I'll open this up for questions and comments. What I really want to emphasize, though, is that this may have seemed like a long and winding road to get to where we are, but look where we are. We have all this set up, and it took minutes of our time to do this. I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to allow my Application Insights service here to connect to the work item project tracking board over in my Azure DevOps project. Okay, so here's the address of the WonderPower Azure DevOps project, which I'm going to need, and I'm going to enter that here. Take out that part of it. So that's my Azure DevOps organization's name. This is the name of the project that I have in there. It also wants me to specify an area. I don't have areas set up right now, so I'm just going to use the name of the project as my area. Now, because I'm going to be, what I'm doing is I'm going to allow my Application Insights service to push work items into my Azure DevOps project board, and I need to make sure that I'm authorized to do that. So I click that, and it would have, if I were doing this the first time, I've done this several times now, but it would have prompted me to, if I was doing it the first time, to confirm that I do indeed want to allow that to happen. Okay, so now it says validation successful. And now, if I go back in here, and let's take one of these failed requests. And I have a link right here above the application details where I can just say create work item. And it is now going to insert a bug, which is a type of work item, into the project board, like that. And if I go back over to Azure DevOps and open up the boards, there's my work item. And I can now put this in a sprint. I can assign it to a member of the project team over there, like me, and we can start tracking it. The other thing I want to show, or two other things, I want to show how the fact that you can set up alerts. There's a little bit to that, so I won't actually set one up, but this is having it send email notifications. You can also configure it to do it other ways, but the usual default way is to use email either an individual or a group. Probably better in real life to do it to a group. There is one alert group already set up called Failure Anomalies. Let's take a look at that real quick. Whenever failure anomaly occurs here, actually let's not do that. Let's just go back and create a new one. Show you the steps. So it's going to say, what resource do you want this to come from? I want to come from here. What condition do you want? And I get various kinds of conditions I can pick. Let's say that every time there's a certain number of page views in a certain period of time, I want to send an alert. Now, one thing that's cool about this is that I can hard code what I want the rule to be, or I can create what's called a dynamic alert, and this will apply some machine learning. And it will say, let's analyze, this takes some time to get going, but let's analyze over a period of time what the typical traffic is on this particular resource, and then let's generate an alert whenever the average over some interval is greater than that average overall. So if there's a spike in traffic, for instance, this would be a good way of detecting that and letting us know. And then the alert can either just be sent out as an email, or I could do something fancier. I could have it trigger an auto-scaling script, for instance. Okay, who do I send this to? I'm going to send it to an action group. Here's an action group that's already built in. This is built into my Azure subscription. Basically, it consists of me. And let's see, we roll into a name. That's all I need to do, and then I create the rule down here. So if you don't want to be coming in here and looking at this all the time, but you do want to be notified, and if you wanted to do some smart things and decide when there are things that are worth looking at, you can go in here and create these rules. And then the last thing I want to show you is the ability to create a dashboard out of this. So dashboards in the Azure portal are specialized views. This is my default dashboard that I set up previous to this, where I'm just pinning my Azure DevOps projects. But I can create one that's just for this project's application insights data. And all I got to do is click right here at the very top of the application insights page and say I want to create an application dashboard. And all of a sudden all this stuff shows up. And so here we have a bunch of tiles that are keyed into the data. This is all showing the same sort of data that we could have seen if we drilled into things from the application insights menu. This gives us a quick way if somebody wants to come in and just look at everything and say, okay, here's what's going on in the application right now. This gives us a way of selecting what we want to look at, configuring the time intervals we want, or the severity levels that we want, or the scales that we want to show on these axes. And we can add more tiles to this, take tiles out that we're not using. We can have more than one, too. I can create multiple dashboards like this for different specialized users. The main point that I want to leave you with are two things. First is that we can now have everybody on the development team able to see, well, able to do the whole thing. Because when a developer checks in code, or when anybody checks in code, developer, or maybe it's not even development stuff, maybe it's like IT people changing the resource group templates. When code is checked into the repository, it can trigger an automatic build followed by an automatic running of unit tests followed by an automatic release straight into Azure. We don't have to shut down the Azure sites in order to do that. And then if we have monitoring set up in Azure, we can immediately start generating data, and everybody can go into that. We can give everybody on the team permission to go in and see all that data. Now, not everybody on the team necessarily wants to go in and see all that data, and what different people want to see may be different, so we can create specialized dashboards for individual people. But we're able to make everyone on our Agile development team more aware of how the application is functioning in the environments where we're putting it. And that, to me, is a huge step forward in terms of being able to be productive with Agile methodology. Okay, so with that, I'm going to flip over to the meeting, and I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions, comments they'd like to either unmute and get in, or if anybody's been typing a text. We appreciate any input we can get from you at this point. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. No, I guess I won't. I'll leave it up in case anybody wants to see anything else.
Hey, Richard, why don't you go ahead and put our contact information on the screen? And I just want to, this is Brian Conley. I'm in the Cleveland office. I just want to thank Richard for going ahead and putting this presentation together on Azure and DevOps. There will be a recording of this presentation on our website if you want to go back and reference it again, BennettAdelson.com. We have Grant and myself, Brian Conley, out of the Cleveland office. We have Jeff Lepore, who is out of our Columbus office. If anybody currently is running any DevOps or Azure projects that you would like to kind of reference and discuss, you can reach out to any one of us, and we can put a meeting together with Richard and or other folks from our Azure team. I just want to thank Richard for putting this together, going through the real-time demo, and I think at this stage, this is part of our Demystifying the Microsoft webinar series, and we're going to have more webinars coming up in the future. Look for emails that detail that out. I appreciate everybody's time. We're about 2 minutes out. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us, or if someone wants to jump on and have a question, go ahead.